Resident Evil 4 is a game that I really adore. I've played through it front to back probably about 10 times, and no matter how much I play it, it never gets old. There's just so much to love about it. The gameplay is phenomenal and largely consists of suplexing cultists, which is always fun, and the characters really fit in well with this game. Leon's one-liners are always much improved.
Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Resident Evil 4 is an action horror game about Leon S. Kennedy, who's the president's bodyguard, who is trying to find the president's kidnapped daughter. So before the remake comes out, I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about why I love the original Resident Evil 4. First off, the game is just absolutely nuts. It's completely absurd in all the best ways. For instance, here's a question. Why does a castle have a giant lava room? There's literally no point to having this room in your castle, and how does it even work? Is there a volcano built into the castle? Also, what's up with this giant spiky wheel thing that they used to chase Ashley? I don't even know what it's supposed to be. It just looks like it has giant drills on the front of it, and it's used solely for the purpose of killing people down a hallway. And I mentioned it already, but who in their right mind thought it was a good idea to include suplexes in what's supposed to be a survival horror game? Because they were absolutely right. Resident Evil 4 isn't the scariest Resident Evil game, but it's probably one of the most fun. Even though the gameplay consists mostly of shooting guys in the head and then running up and kicking them, it seems to never get stale. I think a large part of this is due to all the monsters you face. While most other Resident Evil games have you fighting straight up zombies, Resident Evil 4 has you fighting a large swath of parasite-infected people, and there are all kinds of other weird animals and dogs that you face, and you fight giant cockroaches, and you fight this giant, I don't even know what it's called, it's a reptile type thing that's the bodyguard to a dwarf, and then later on you fight the dwarf, and then you fight a guy who has a giant shield arm. I don't know how to explain it properly. And then the last boss of the game is essentially a giant spider. I feel like Resident Evil has always had cool monsters, but 4 has some of the coolest in the series. This game has one quality that I've never heard anyone talk about, which is the fact that it feels like a journey. It feels timeless in a lot of ways. I think a lot of the reason for that is that it is kind of the archetypal going and saving the princess type story. Leon isn't exactly a knight, and Ashley isn't exactly a princess, but they're about as close to those things as you can get in the modern day. And so when I say that the game feels timeless, I mean that it feels like an adventure. The game has a beginning, a middle, and an ending, and Leon shows up in other Resident Evil games such as 6, but in a lot of ways this is the definitive version of Leon for me. This game isn't exactly known for its story or anything like that. It's not known for its great writing, but the writing that is there absolutely works. The story is goofy and it's silly and it's funny, and Leon says a lot of things that are especially funny in scary scenarios. You can tell that whenever they made this game, they put fun first before anything else. It does feel like a horror game in parts, specifically with the regenerators. The regenerators are these big, scary zombie-looking guys who have multiple parasites in them, and you have to shoot the parasites in them in order to kill them, and then whenever you shoot all 4 or 5 parasites, they just straight up explode. But I think that Resident Evil 4 is really an action game through and through. Leon does all kinds of dodges and rolls, and he jumps out of windows. I think that's one of the reasons I really love it. As someone who's played pretty much all the mainline Resident Evil games, I really admire the team for pushing fun first before horror. And this is a weird conversation to start up because I think you can absolutely have horror and fun in the same box. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, but I think that if they had tried to go in more of a horror direction, I don't think that the game would nearly be as replayable or as fun. I think that if they had included more classic puzzles, then it probably would have slowed the pace down a bit. I mean, there are puzzles in the game, but they're essentially for babies. And so I think one of the reasons I have played through the game so many times is just because it's go, 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 go right from the start. I think one of the reasons why the gameplay in this is so addictive is because the game is able to develop a massive amount of tension by constantly throwing enemies at you. One really cool feature about it is that the game has a hidden difficulty adjuster. At the start of the game, you can choose between easy, normal, and professional difficulties, but the game also automatically adjusts the difficulty depending on how well you're doing, so it will make things easier or harder for you depending on if you're a good player or not. Another thing I really love about the game is the locations. The game is essentially divided into 3 main segments. First, you have the village, which I think is the best part of the game. Next up, you have this crazy gothic castle, which has a billion cultists in it, and it has all kinds of weird things like a giant robot statue that chases you and then falls off a bridge. And then lastly, you have the island. Breaking the game up into segments like this is nothing new for Resident Evil, and it's definitely not new for games as a whole, but I think that doing it this way and having the game divided up into 3 major sections keeps things fresh because you're never staying in one area for too long. I think what's really interesting about this game, especially as a longtime Resident Evil fan, again is that they essentially take the classic Resident Evil formula of having zombies and zombie dogs and that sort of thing, but they remix it. This game is really special because if you know anything about the background of it, then you'll know that without this game, then Resident Evil as a franchise probably wouldn't have continued. The reason why it is so different from previous entries in the series is because sales were fading, and so they knew they had to do something new. The background for the game is very interesting because they made and threw away something like 3 different prototypes for the game before they settled on what we eventually got as Resident Evil 4, and one of the prototypes ended up being turned into Devil May Cry, which I absolutely love. And there are some really cool ideas in some of the thrown away prototype models. In one of the prototype demos, Leon was going to hallucinate and he was going to fight these apparitions, and that sort of became a thing in Resident Evil 8. And so it's really cool that they went back and took some of their old ideas and brought them to life. I think a large part of why the story works is because of the characters. They're all kind of static characters. No one really changes or grows, and normally I would say that's a bad thing, but in this instance I think it really works in the game's favor. I think that any character growth probably would have gotten in the way of the actual gameplay. This isn't something like Silent Hill 2 where the character is the point of the game. In Resident Evil 4, the gameplay is very much the point of the game. So in closing, I absolutely love this game. I think it's absolutely phenomenal, and I look forward to the remake that's coming out in March. Hopefully it lives up to the original and maybe even surpasses it. At the end of the day, I think that the reason I love this game so much is just because it's fun. It's just a fantastic action horror game, and I think that you can tell that it's great because of how many imitators it has. I love Dead Space, but Dead Space is literally just Resident Evil 4 in space, and any third-person shooter that came after Resident Evil 4 adopted its over-the-shoulder aiming perspective. I'd like to talk about Resident Evil 4's legacy, so I might do that at some point in the future because I think it has quite an extensive legacy. Resident Evil 4 rocks. Thank you for watching.